Jax adjusts the camera lens as the sun dips behind the barren hills of Blackwood Farm. He signals Chloe and Leo, indicating it is time to hop the rusted barbed wire fence. The rural silence is broken only by the metallic clink of gear hitting the weathered posts. They came seeking views, ignoring the warnings painted in faded red across the wooden boundary signs. Adrenaline pulses through Jax's veins as he grins at the lens, promising his viewers something epic. He fails to notice that, from the high silo, a motionless silhouette watches their every move. Chloe hesitates for a second, feeling a chill that has nothing to do with the breeze. She points her flashlight at the ground, noticing the tall grass seems recently crushed down. There are no animal tracks, but marks resembling human feet dragging something heavy toward the house. She wipes sweat from her forehead and breathes deeply, trying to rationalize her growing internal dread. Jax calls her in a whisper, impatient with her delay, so she keeps her worry silent. After all, they had explored dozens of haunted places before, without ever seeing anything truly real. Leo is the last to cross the barrier, feeling the weight of the heavy emergency bag. He was always the cautious one of the trio, the type to read the fine print. His eyes sweep the dark horizon, trying to spot the car they hid a mile away. The distance now feels like an eternity, and the farm's darkness seems to swallow the light. He feels they are making a terrible mistake, but loyalty to his friends keeps him moving. The main gate creaks in the distance, a sound like a metallic moan echoing through corn. The path to the main house is flanked by endless rows of dry, whispering cornstalks. Jax leads the way, narrating to the camera in a low, dramatic voice for the video. He mentions local legends about the Blackwood family and the strange lights seen at night lately. With every step, the smell of rot and organic decay grows stronger, thickening the stagnant air. Chloe turns on the directional mic, catching rhythmic clicking noises coming from deep within the stalks. She glances sideways, but her light only reveals yellowed leaves and distorted, dancing shadows on the ground. The farmhouse porch groans under their weight, revealing rotting boards that threaten to give way soon. The white paint is peeling, exposing gray wood that looks like bare bone under the moonlight. Jax places his hand on the brass knob, which is surprisingly cold and free of dust. He looks at the camera, builds the suspense, and turns the metal, hearing the lock click. The door swings open slowly, revealing a dark hallway that exhales a metallic scent of iron. None of them speak. The heavy air inside the house seems to steal their words and courage. They enter the living room, where furniture covered in white sheets looks like ghosts waiting patiently. Jax illuminates a dining table set for 5 people, with fine china plates and silver cutlery. The strange thing is the lack of dust, as if someone prepared the meal recently today. Chloe brings the camera close to a glass, noting a dark, viscous residue at the bottom. Leo's panic rises when he notices the sheets over the sofas have strangely human-like jagged shapes. He begs to leave, but Jax is hypnotized by the scene, adjusting focus for a shot. Suddenly, a loud thud from upstairs makes them jump and point their flashlights toward the ceiling. The sound was like a heavy piece of furniture being dragged violently across the wooden floor. Jax smirks, thinking it is the perfect moment for the vlog, and starts the shaky ascent. Chloe follows by professional instinct, though her hands tremble visibly as she holds the digital camera. Leo stays behind in the hall, staring fixedly at the front door they just walked through. He realizes, with pure horror, that the door they left wide open is now shut tight. At the top of the stairs, the hallway is narrow and decorated with scratched family photos. Jax stops in front of the first door on the left, where the dragging sound originated. He leans his ear against the wood and signals Chloe to capture the reaction of entry. The silence that follows is absolute, a vacuum that presses against their eardrums in a painful way. With a quick movement, Jax kicks the door open, revealing a child's room with old toys. In the center of the room, a wooden rocking horse moves back and forth completely alone. Downstairs, Leo desperately tries to turn the front door handle, but it does not move at all. He screams for his friends, but his voice is muffled by thick walls and damp wallpaper. He looks down the hallway and sees a tall, thin figure standing by the kitchen entrance. The figure wears soiled farmer's overalls and a mask made of raw hide that hides everything. Leo tries to retreat, but his legs feel like lead as the figure starts walking toward him. He notices the figure carries a rusted metal hook that glints weakly in the pale moonlight. Jax and Chloe hear Leo's muffled scream and race back to the staircase with racing hearts. From above, they see Leo being dragged into the kitchen's darkness by a large, pale hand. Jax tries to shout his friend's name, but his camera light suddenly flickers and dies out. They hear the sound of a heavy bolt being thrown and a deadly silence returns again. The video Jax wanted is now a record of a nightmare that has only just begun. They are trapped, without light or their friend, while something hungry moves through the dark house. Jax fumbles with his camera in the oppressive dark, his breathing shallow and jagged with fear. Chloe grips his arm so hard her fingernails dig through his jacket and into his skin. They descend the stairs with agonizing slowness, their eyes struggling to adjust to the pitch-black hallway below. Every floorboard beneath their boots emits a treacherous groan that sounds like a scream in the silence. The scent of copper and old grease is overwhelming now, emanating from the kitchen where Leo vanished. Jax finally gets his backup flashlight to flicker on, revealing a trail of fresh, dark smears. The blood leads directly to a heavy oak door that previously seemed to be part of the wall. The oak door is slightly ajar, revealing a narrow stone staircase that leads deep into the earth. Cold, damp air rises from the basement, carrying the rhythmic sound of metal scraping against a wet stone. Jax whispers Leo's name into the void, but only a wet, gurgling echo returns from the depths. Chloe pleads with him to find another way out, but all the windows are now shuttered. Heavy iron plates have slid over the glass panes, sealing the farmhouse like a windowless wooden tomb. With no other choice, they begin to descend the cold stone steps into the heart of the cellar. The walls here are lined with jars of preserved meat that look disturbingly like human fingers and ears. The basement opens into a vast, cavernous space that extends far beyond the house's original foundation limits. Rows of rusted meat hooks hang from the ceiling, swaying gently despite the lack of any wind. In the center of the room, a flickering bulb casts long, dancing shadows against the damp brick. They see Leo strapped to a wooden chair, his mouth gagged with thick, grease-stained burlap and twine. His eyes are wide with a level of terror that makes Chloe gasp and cover her mouth. Beside him, a workbench is covered in surgical tools and primitive farm implements caked in dried blood. The figure in the raw hide mask stands over him, testing the edge of a jagged saw. Jax raises his camera, his survival instinct briefly overtaken by the macabre scene unfolding before his very eyes. The masked man turns his head with a slow, mechanical precision that suggests he isn't entirely human. He stands nearly 7 feet tall, his skin where visible appearing gray and leathery like cured meat. A low, guttural vibration starts in his chest, a sound that mimics the low lowing of cattle. Chloe finds a heavy iron wrench on a nearby shelf and grips it with white-knuckled, desperate force. She knows they have only one chance to strike before the giant finishes his grim, bloody work. The giant steps away from Leo and begins to walk toward the two intruders with terrifying calm. As the giant approaches, Jax throws his heavy camera bag at the creature's feet to trip him. The distraction works for a split second, allowing Chloe to lung forward and swing the heavy wrench. The metal connects with the giant's shoulder with a sickening thud, but he doesn't even flinch or cry. Instead, he reaches out with a massive hand and swats Chloe aside like she is a fly. She hits a row of meat jars, shattering them and drenching herself in foul, vinegary-smelling brine. Jax rushes to Leo, pulling a pocket knife to saw through the thick burlap and rough rope. His hands are shaking so violently that he nearly cuts his own fingers in the frantic process. The ropes finally snap, and Leo collapses forward, his legs too weak to support his trembling, exhausted body. Jax hauls him up, throwing Leo's arm over his shoulder while keeping an eye on the giant. Chloe recovers from the floor, her face pale and her clothes stained with the contents of the jars. The giant is momentarily distracted, picking up a fallen piece of meat and placing it in his mouth. They use this grotesque moment of feeding to scramble back toward the stone stairs, gasping for clean air. The sound of the giant's heavy, rhythmic footsteps resumes behind them, faster and more purposeful than before. They reach the top of the stairs and slam the oak door, sliding the bolt just in time. Back in the kitchen, they realize the house is changing, the hallways stretching and twisting in impossible ways. The door that led to the living room now opens into a long, dark pantry filled with bones. Every exit they remember has been replaced by more rooms, more darkness, and more smells of ancient decay. It's as if the farmhouse is a living organism, rearranging its internal organs to keep them trapped inside. Leo tries to speak, but his throat is bruised, and he can only manage a raspy, painful wheeze. Chloe finds a map on the wall, but the ink is made of blood and moves. The house is hungry, and it has no intention of letting its new guests leave the table. Jax checks the footage on his camera, realizing the giant never actually appeared on the digital screen at all. Where the masked man stood, there is only a shimmering distortion in the air, a gap in reality. This realization sends a new wave of pure existential dread through the group as they huddle together tightly. They aren't just fighting a man in a mask. They are trapped inside something much more ancient. The walls begin to throb with a low, rhythmic heartbeat that vibrates through the very soles of their boots. Chloe notices that the wallpaper is starting to weep a thick, translucent fluid that smells like rotting corn. The farmhouse is beginning to digest them, and they are still alive to feel the first bite. They hear a scratching sound coming from inside the walls, like thousands of tiny claws skittering behind the wood. Jax shines his light on a vent, seeing dozens of pale, lidless eyes staring back at him intensely. The Blackwood family wasn't just one man. It was a hive of something that had long ago forgotten. The scratching grows louder, moving from the walls to the ceiling directly above their heads with a frantic energy. Plaster begins to fall in white flakes, looking like snow as it lands on their terrified, upturned faces. A section of the ceiling gives way, and a spindly, pale limb reaches down to grab at Chloe's hair. She screams, swinging her light as the group bolts down the shifting, narrow hallway toward the back. The pantry leads them to a heavy metal hatch in the floor that smells of fresh earth and rain. It is their only hope of escaping the house, even if it leads further down into the unknown. Jax kicks the hatch open, revealing a slide that disappears into a tunnel of rough-hewn, red Missouri clay. Behind them, the hallway is shrinking, the walls closing in like a giant, wooden vise meant to crush. One by one, they leap into the darkness, sliding down the slick, cold earth into the farm's depths. They leave the house behind, but the farmhouse is only the mouth of this great, hungry, rural beast. The tunnel leads them toward the roots of the cornfield, where the real harvest is waiting to begin. The slide ends abruptly, dumping the trio into a cavernous tunnel carved directly into the hard, red clay. Above them, the hatch slams shut with a finality that echoes like a gunshot through the narrow, dark space. The air here is thick with the scent of wet soil and the sweet, cloying aroma of rotting vegetation. Massive, pale roots from the cornfield above hang from the ceiling like the tangled hair of buried, restless giants. Jax turns on his secondary light, revealing that the tunnel walls are lined with old, rusted farming tools. These implements are embedded in the earth as if they grew there, becoming part of the farm's strange biology. Leo stumbles forward, his hands trembling as he touches the cold, damp walls to keep his balance and orientation. The tunnel branches off into dozens of identical paths, creating a subterranean maze that defies any logical or human sense. Chloe notices that the roots above are twitching, reacting to the sound of their voices and their heavy, panicked breathing. She whispers for the others to be quiet, but the earth itself seems to be listening to their hearts. Every time they choose a path, the tunnel behind them seems to narrow, physically pushing them further into darkness. Jax tries to use his compass, but the needle spins wildly, caught in a powerful and localized magnetic field. It becomes clear that the farm operates on laws of physics that do not apply to the world outside. They are no longer in Nebraska. They are inside the belly of an ancient, hungry, and territorial god. A low, rhythmic chanting begins to vibrate through the floor, a sound that feels more like a physical pulse. It is the sound of the Blackwood family, a collective consciousness that has merged with the land over centuries. Leo points toward a glowing light at the end of a long, straight corridor of packed, red mud. They move toward it, hoping for an exit, but instead find a chamber filled with flickering tallow candlelight. In the center of the room stands an altar made of petrified corn husks and bleached human pelvic bones. Upon the altar lies a collection of Polaroid photos, all showing trespassers from the last 50 years of history. The most recent photo is still developing, showing Jax, Chloe, and Leo entering the farmhouse just hours ago. The chanting grows louder, and the roots in the ceiling begin to descend, reaching for the trio like wooden fingers. Jax grabs a photo of a young woman from the altar, realizing it is a missing person from 1994. Her eyes in the picture seem to move, tracking his hand with a look of eternal, silent, and frozen agony. Suddenly, the masked giant from the basement steps out from a hidden alcove, blocking their only way back out. He is not alone this time. Several smaller, hunched figures emerge from the shadows of the hanging, thick roots. These creatures are pale, hairless, and have vestigial eyes that have been sewn shut with thick, black fishing line. They move with a skittering, insect-like grace, clicking their teeth in a hungry, rhythmic, and terrifyingly coordinated pattern. Chloe swings her flashlight at the nearest creature, but it vanishes into a hole in the clay wall instantly. The giant raises a heavy, rusted scythe, the blade reflecting the dim orange glow of the dying tallow candles. Jax pulls Leo and Chloe toward a narrow crevice in the back of the chamber, hoping they can fit. The gap is tight, scraping their skin and tearing their clothes as they force their bodies through the rock. They can hear the giant's heavy breathing and the wet, slapping sound of the blind creatures following them inside. The tunnel they entered is so narrow they have to crawl on their stomachs through the freezing, wet mud. The claustrophobia is in physical weight, pressing down on their lungs and making every single breath a desperate struggle. As they crawl, the tunnel begins to fill with a thick yellowish gas that smells like concentrated fermented grain. Their eyes sting, and their vision blurs as the hallucinogenic fumes take hold of their fragile, terrified human minds. Jack sees the walls of the tunnel turn into rows of teeth, snapping at his heels as he moves. Chloe hears the voice of her mother calling to her from the darkness ahead, a sweet but mocking sound. Leo feels the roots entering his skin, weaving into his veins and turning his blood into thick black sap. They are losing their grip on reality, which is exactly what the farm needs to finish the harvest. The transition from human to fertilizer is not just physical, it is a slow erosion of the very soul. They emerge into a larger cavern where the great root of the Blackwood Farm resides in the dark center. It is a massive, pulsating heart made of intertwined vines, glowing with a sickly, bioluminescent green and yellow light. Around the heart, dozens of previous trespassers are encased in translucent cocoons made of hardened, dried corn silk and sap. Some are still twitching, their bodies being slowly absorbed into the massive, hungry root system of the farm above. The giant stands at the edge of this chamber, waiting for them to succumb to the gas and exhaustion. He does not need to hunt them anymore. The environment itself is designed to harvest their very lives. Jax tries to stand, but his legs feel like they have taken root in the soft, red clay. Chloe finds a discarded flare in the mud, likely dropped by a victim who came here many decades before them. She fumbles with the striker, her fingers numb and unresponsive due to the cold and the creeping toxic gas. The giant begins to walk toward them, his scythe dragging on the ground, creating a shower of orange sparks. If she can light the flare, the concentrated grain gas in the air might ignite, causing a massive explosion. It is a suicidal plan, but the alternative is becoming a permanent, twitching part of the farm's root system. She looks at Jax and Leo, seeing the green light of the heart reflected in their vacant, dying eyes. With a scream of defiance, she strikes the flare against a jagged rock, praying for a cleansing fire. The flare sputters to life, casting a brilliant, blinding crimson light that hurts their dilated, gas-fogged, and weary eyes. The giant pauses, shielding his sensitive, masked face from the sudden, intense heat and the violent red chemical glare. The gas in the air doesn't explode instantly, but it begins to sizzle and burn with a low, blue flame. The great root heart shudders, letting out a high-pitched subsonic frequency that makes their teeth ache and ears bleed. This is the first time the farm has felt pain in over 100 years of its dark existence. The blind creatures shriek and retreat into the deeper shadows, terrified by the light and the burning toxic air. Chloe uses the moment of chaos to grab her friends and pull them toward a vertical ventilation shaft. They begin to climb the rusted metal rungs of the shaft, the heat from the burning gas rising below. The giant recovers and swings his scythe, narrowly missing Jax's boot as he hauls himself up the metal ladder. The sound of the great root screaming follows them up, a sound that no human was ever meant to hear. They climb until their muscles scream in protest, and their lungs burn from the soot and the thinning hot air. Above them, a faint silver light appears, the first hint of the real moon in the sky above the field. They are climbing toward the surface, but the farm is already sending its tendrils up to pull them back. The harvest is not over until the earth is fed, and the Blackwood land is still very, very hungry. They burst through the rusted grate of the ventilation shaft, collapsing onto the cool, damp earth of the field. The night air is freezing, but it feels like a blessing compared to the suffocating, toxic heat of below. Jax coughs violently, spitting out red clay and the bitter taste of the hallucinogenic grain gas they had inhaled. Around them, the corn stands over 10 feet tall, a golden cage that stretches toward the dark, indifferent horizon. The moon is a pale, sickly crescent, casting long and jagged shadows that seem to move of their own. They are out of the house, but they are still deep within the heart of the Blackwood's twisted territory. Every direction looks identical, a repetitive nightmare of dry leaves and stalks that hiss in the midnight wind. Leo tries to stand, but his equilibrium is shattered, and he tumbles back into the dirt with a groan. Chloe grips his hand, her own skin stained black from the flare's soot and the grease of the shaft. She looks back at the farmhouse, which sits like a brooding, dark mountain against the starless, velvet Iowa sky. The windows of the house are glowing with a faint, internal amber light, pulsing like a slow, dying ember. There is no sign of the giant yet, but the corn around them begins to sway in rhythmic patterns. It is not the wind moving the stalks, it is something passing through them with a predatory, silent grace. The clicking sound they heard in the tunnels resumes, echoing from all sides of the trio simultaneously now. Jax checks his camera, but the screen is cracked and only displays a static-filled image of his own face. Behind his digital reflection, he sees dozens of white masks peering through the corn, watching them with empty eyes. He tells the others to stay close and move in a straight line, hoping to reach the road. Every step they take is met by the dry, abrasive rustle of the corn blades cutting at their skin. The stalks seem to lean in, their sharp edges drawing thin lines of blood across their tired, dirty faces. They are being funneled, pushed toward a specific direction by the very environment they are trying to escape from. The ground beneath their feet feels spongy and soft, like walking on a layer of mossy, decaying flesh. They reach a small clearing in the center of the field where an ancient, gnarled oak tree stands alone. Hanging from its skeletal branches are dozens of wind chimes made from human teeth and small, delicate finger bones. The sound they produce is not musical. It is a discordant, jarring clatter that vibrates in their very skulls. Below the tree, a series of shallow pits have been dug, each filled with a different, gruesome offering. One pit contains hundreds of rusted keys, while another is filled with locks of hair tied in silk. Jax realizes these are the memories of the farm, the only things left of those who were harvested. The wind chimes begin to spin violently as the temperature drops, turning their breath into thick white mist. A shadow detaches itself from the trunk of the tree, revealing a woman dressed in a tattered wedding gown. Her skin is the color of parchment, and her eyes have been replaced by two large polished black river stones. She doesn't speak, but her mouth opens to reveal a nest of writhing black beetles that spill onto her. She points a bony, long finger toward the farmhouse, then toward the ground where the trio is currently standing. Chloe realizes this is the matriarch of the Blackwood line, the one who started the pact with the soil. The woman's presence brings a sense of overwhelming sorrow and a heavy, crushing weight of centuries of dark sin. She is not there to help them. She is there to witness the final stage of their capture. The clicking grows deafening as the blind, pale creatures emerge from the corn, surrounding the clearing in a circle. They do not attack immediately, but instead begin to sway in unison with the rhythmic movement of the trees. The giant appears behind the bride, his scythe now glowing with the same sickly green light as the heart. He raises the weapon high, and the wind chimes respond with a frantic metallic screaming that pierces the dark. Leo falls to his knees, covering his ears as blood begins to trickle from his nose and his eyes. Jax tries to swing a heavy branch, but the air around the giant is thick and resists movement. It feels like they are moving through a sea of invisible, cold, and viscous gelatinous liquid. Suddenly, the ground begins to heave and buckle, as if a massive creature is turning over beneath the soil. The pits around the oak tree overflow with a thick black bile that smells of ancient rotted swamp water. Chloe grabs a handful of the hair from the pit, realizing it belongs to people of all ages. She sees a locket among the offerings and snaps it open, finding a picture of a young Jax. The realization hits her like a physical blow. The farm has been calling them here for their entire lives. This was not a random exploration. It was a homecoming for a debt they didn't know they owed. Jax looks at the photo, his expression shifting from terror to a blank, terrifyingly hollow sort of calm. The bride in the tattered gown moves toward Jax, her stone eyes reflecting a history of blood and grain. She reaches out a cold hand and touches his forehead, leaving a smudge of black, oily soot behind. Jax stops resisting, his arms dropping to his sides as he stares at the giant with a vacant smile. Chloe screams his name, but he doesn't respond, his mind already being integrated into the farm's vast network. The blind creatures begin to close the circle, their long fingers reaching out to touch Chloe and Leo's clothes. The giant steps forward, the blade of his scythe whistling through the air as he prepares the first cut. The ritual of the harvest is reaching its peak, and the moon turns a deep, bruised shade. Leo finds a sudden burst of strength, grabbing a heavy stone from the altar and hurling it at the stone strikes the giant's mask, cracking the dried hide and revealing a glimpse of the void within. A sound of rushing wind erupts from the crack, knocking the creatures back and breaking the hypnotic dark spell. Jax blinks, the darkness in his eyes receding just enough for him to see Chloe's desperate, tearful face again. He shakes off the lethargy and grabs her hand, pulling her away from the bride and the oak tree. They run blindly into the corn, no longer caring about direction, only wanting to put distance between them. The corn stalks hiss and snap at them, trying to trip their feet and pull them down. They stumble upon an old, overgrown dirt road that wasn't there just a few moments before the stone struck. It is a path of gray dust and broken gravel, leading away from the farmhouse and the oak tree. Behind them, the giant lets out a roar that sounds like a mountain crumbling into a deep, dark sea. The cornfield begins to close in on the road, the stalks moving like the teeth of a zipper. They run with everything they have left, their lungs feeling like they are filled with hot, broken glass. The road is their only hope, but in Blackwood Farm, even the path to freedom usually leads back. The silver light of the moon begins to fade as a thick, unnatural fog rolls across the field. The gray dirt road stretches infinitely into the fog, a narrow ribbon of hope amidst the suffocating corn. Jax, Chloe, and Leo run until their pulses thrum in their throats like trapped birds fighting for air. Every time they look back, the farmhouse is there, looming at the same distance despite their frantic, desperate pace. The fog thickens, turning into a wall of white static that swallows the sound of their heavy, rhythmic footsteps. Shadows dance within the mist, taking the forms of people they once knew and loved in the world. These apparitions reach out with translucent hands, whispering secrets that sound like the dry rustle of parched autumn leaves. The road beneath them begins to soften, turning from solid gravel into a substance resembling wet, gray ash. Chloe stops abruptly when she sees a figure standing in the middle of the path, perfectly still and silent. As they approach, she realizes it is a mirror, a tall, ornate glass standing upright without any visible support. Jax raises his flashlight, but the beam doesn't reflect. It is absorbed by the dark, swirling silver surface. When they look into the glass, they don't see their current, battered selves reflected back in the frame. They see versions of themselves dressed in old-fashioned 19th century farming clothes, working the very land they are fleeing. Their reflections stop working and look at them with eyes that are nothing but hollow, black, empty pits. A thin crack appears at the top of the mirror, spreading like a spiderweb across the glass. The sound of the cracking glass is followed by a wet, tearing noise from the corn on either side. The giant emerges from the fog, but he has changed, his body now fused with rusted farm machinery. Gears turn within his chest, and his scythe has been replaced by a rotating blade of serrated black iron. He moves with a jerky, mechanical gait, his breath coming out as puffs of thick, black, oily smoke. Behind him, the blind creatures carry lanterns filled with glowing green fireflies that pulse in time with the farm. The mechanical giant raises his arm, and the rotating blade begins to hum with a high-pitched, agonizing whine. They are trapped between the mirror of their possible past and the engine of their certain bloody future. Leo grabs a heavy shard of glass that has fallen from the mirror's frame, his hands bleeding profusely. He doesn't look at the giant. He looks at the reflection of the farmhouse visible within the silvered pane. He realizes the house in the mirror has a back door that is wide open and invitingly bright. Without a word, he hurls the shard at the giant's mechanical heart, causing a spray of black sparks. While the monster is momentarily stunned, Leo screams for the others to jump into the mirror's dark surface. Jax hesitates, fearing it is another trap, but Chloe grabs his hand and pulls him toward the glass. They leap forward, expecting a hard impact, but instead, they fall into a cold, liquid, and silver void. They emerge into a version of the farmhouse that is clean, bright, and filled with the scent of bread. The walls are painted a cheerful yellow, and the sun shines through the windows onto a polished wooden floor. For a moment, they think they have escaped, that the nightmare was just a fever dream of the field. However, there are no doors or windows that lead outside. The house is an island in a white sea. Jax walks to the kitchen, finding a calendar on the wall where every single day is marked harvest. He looks at his hands and sees they are becoming pale and translucent, just like the ghosts in fog. Chloe tries to open the front door, but it is painted onto the wall with perfect deceptive detail. The silence of this perfect house is more terrifying than the screams they heard in the red clay tunnels. They can hear the giant banging on the other side of the walls, trying to break into this sanctuary. The wallpaper begins to peel back, revealing the rotting gray wood and the weeping sores of the real house. This is a lure, a psychological trap designed to lower their guard before the farm claims their tired spirits. Leo finds a cellar door in the kitchen that looks different. It is made of solid, unyielding, and cold steel. He senses that this is the brain of the house, the place where the farm's true consciousness resides. They have to descend once more, not as victims, but as intruders in the farm's private, inner sanctum. Jax picks up a heavy kitchen knife, his eyes hardening as he rejects the false comfort of the room. He knows that the only way to break the cycle is to destroy the thing that dreams this place. They open the steel door, and instead of stairs, they find a vertical shaft lined with humming copper wires. The wires pulse with a rhythmic, golden light, carrying energy from the great root to the rest of the house. As they descend the ladder, the temperature rises, and the air begins to smell like ozone and burnt hair. They are entering the nervous system of Blackwood Farm, the place where the physical and supernatural worlds finally meet. Every rung they descend feels like a step deeper into a mind that hasn't thought human thoughts. At the bottom of the shaft, they find a room filled with old-fashioned television monitors stacked from floor to ceiling. Each screen shows a different room in the house, but in different time periods across the last several decades. They see the Blackwood family at dinner in 1920, and they see themselves entering the front door today. In the center of the room sits a man in a business suit, his back turned to them. He is typing on an old, mechanical typewriter that produces a sound like bones snapping in a dark room. When he turns around, he has no face, just a smooth surface of skin with the word "no" branded. He is the architect, the one who documents the harvest and maintains the farm's complex, shifting, dark geometry. The architect stands up and the television screens begin to explode one by one, showering the room in glass. He speaks not with a voice but by typing rapidly, the words appearing as burn marks on the walls. "The soil demands a record," the walls scream in charred black letters that smoke and hiss with heat. Jax lunges at the man, but the architect moves like a blur, his movements flickering like old, damaged film. He grabs Jax by the throat, and the monitors show Jax's life being erased from the history of the world. Chloe realizes the architect is the one holding their identities together. Without him, they will simply cease to exist. She looks for a way to stop the typewriter, the source of the man's terrible and creative power. Leo spots a jar of the black bile they saw in the field, sitting on a shelf near the... He grabs it and pours the thick, corrosive liquid over the typewriter's keys and the architect's busy hands. The machine begins to scream, a high mechanical wail that causes the entire farmhouse to shake and groan in pain. The architect's body begins to dissolve into ink and paper, his smooth face cracking like dry, sun-baked mud. The screens go dark, and the golden light in the copper wires turns a violent, angry shade of red. The farm is losing its mind, and the trio is caught in the middle of a psychic collapse. They have to get out before the house forgets how to exist and collapses into a void. The foundation of the farmhouse shudders as the architect's ink-filled body vanishes into the dark, vibrating floorboards. Red light pulses through the copper wires like an overloaded circuit, threatening to ignite the very air they breathe. "Run!" Jack screams, grabbing Chloe and Leo as the room begins to fold in on itself like paper. The steel walls of the inner sanctum groan, buckling under the weight of the collapsing reality above their heads. They scramble back up the ladder, the metal rungs burning their palms with a searing, unnatural white heat. Behind them, the television monitors melt into a pool of black glass that devours the light of their flashlights. The farm is no longer trying to digest them. It is trying to delete them from existence entirely. They burst back into the kitchen, but the cheerful yellow paint is gone, replaced by a void of shadows. The house is deconstructing, the walls flying outward into the dark Nebraska night like shards of a broken dream. They see the giant one last time, his mechanical parts seizing and exploding in a shower of oily black sparks. He reaches out a trembling hand, not to attack, but as if begging to be saved from the end. The cornfield beyond the house is being swallowed by a massive sinkhole of swirling, red Missouri clay and roots. There is no longer a road, a field, or a porch, only a narrow path of floating wooden debris. They leap from one moving plank to another, balanced precariously over a bottomless, silent, and hungry abyss below. Jax reaches the edge of the collapsing property, where the rusted barbed wire fence still stands as a boundary. Beyond the wire, the world looks normal. The moon is white, the air is clear, and the road is solid. He throws Leo over the fence first, watching his friend land on the gravel with a hard, dusty thud. Chloe follows, her fingers catching on the barbs, drawing one last drop of blood for the farm to keep. Jax prepares to jump, but a thick, pale root shoots out from the void and wraps around his ankle. He is pulled backward, his face hitting the rotting wood as the sinkhole nears his straining, desperate body. The farm is making its final claim, refusing to let its most prized and recorded harvest escape. Chloe doesn't hesitate. She grabs the heavy iron wrench she had carried since the basement and lunges back toward. She swings with every ounce of her remaining strength, severing the pulsing root in a single, desperate, and violent blow. Jax kicks himself free, the black sap of the root spraying across his boots like a dark, sticky oil. He scrambles toward the fence, his fingers clawing at the dirt as the ground beneath him begins to vanish. Chloe grabs his hand, her feet braced against the solid road of the world that still makes actual sense. With a final, agonizing heave, she pulls him across the wire just as the farmhouse disappears into the earth. The sound that follows is a deafening final crack of thunder that shakes the very stars in the sky. A heavy silence falls over the landscape, thick enough to muffle the sound of their sobbing and jagged breath. They stand on the gravel road, looking back at where the Blackwood Farm had stood for over 100 years. There is nothing there now, only a flat, empty field of dirt as if nothing had ever been built. The moon shines brightly on the empty space, revealing no ruins, no corn, and certainly no sign of the giant. The car they parked a mile away is visible in the distance, its metallic surface reflecting the pale light. They are alive, but they are covered in the blood, grease, and red clay of a place that never was. Their cameras are destroyed, their footage gone, and their bodies are mapped with scars that shouldn't legally exist. Jax reaches into his pocket and finds a small, hard object that he doesn't remember picking up during the chaos. He pulls it out to reveal a single blackened tooth tied to a piece of old frayed silk string. It is a wind chime from the oak tree, a souvenir from the farm that refused to be forgotten. He looks at his friends, seeing the same hollow, haunted expression in their eyes that they saw in the mirror. They have escaped the physical harvest, but the seeds of the farm have been planted deep within their minds. They know that they will never truly be free of the whispering corn or the sound of the scythe. The farm didn't need to keep their bodies to ensure that its dark, ancient legend would continue to grow. Leo turns toward the car, but he stops when he notices a small green sprout pushing through the road's gravel. It isn't a weed or common grass. It is a single, perfect stalk of corn growing at an impossible speed. He tries to step on it, but the stalk is as hard as iron, resisting his boot with supernatural force. They realize the boundary of the farm isn't a fence, but a state of mind that they now carry. Wherever they go, the yield will follow, waiting for the next time they close their tired, weary eyes. The nightmare hasn't ended. It has simply changed its location from a farmhouse to the sanctuary of their souls. They are the new architects of the story, the ones who will carry the Blackwood name into the world. They drive away in silence, the headlights cutting through a fog that seems to follow the car like a dog. Jax looks in the rearview mirror, but he doesn't see the road behind them or the empty, dark field. He sees the silhouette of the farmhouse standing tall and proud in the reflection, its windows glowing with amber light. The giant stands on the porch, waving a slow, rhythmic goodbye to the three who managed to get away. Jax closes his eyes, but the image remains burned into his retinas like a flashbulb in a dark room. He realizes he can still hear the clicking of the blind creatures in the rhythm of the car's engine. The harvest was successful after all. The farm has successfully exported its terror into the modern, unsuspecting world. As they reach the highway, the radio flickers to life, playing a distorted, scratching version of a 1920s wedding march. Chloe tries to turn it off, but the dial is stuck, and the volume begins to rise of its own. The voice of the architect whispers through the static, thanking them for the new records they have provided tonight. No trespassing. The GPS screen flashes in bright, rhythmic red letters that pulse in time with their beating, terrified hearts. They are miles away from the property, but the car feels smaller, the air growing thick with the scent. The seats begin to feel like dried corn husks, and the steering wheel turns cold and brassy in Jax's. The farm is a traveler now, and it has found a very fast way to reach its next victims. The story of Blackwood Farm ends not with a death, but with a terrifying, silent, and permanent kind of growth. In the empty field behind them, a new fence begins to sprout from the dirt made of bone and wire. A new sign appears, the paint fresh and dripping like blood under the light of the setting, pale moon. It warns the world of the hunger that lives beneath the soil, waiting for the next generation of curious explorers. But for Jax, Chloe, and Leo, the sign is unnecessary. They already know the truth of the harvest. They are the living evidence that some places don't just take your life, they take your very place in time. And as the sun begins to rise, the first stalks of a new global cornfield begin to break.